Well, welcome to our first roundtable. And this roundtable was going to have an extra person, Hilary Davies, who unfortunately has been feeling rather poorly, so she won't be with us. She's gone back to a hotel to rest. So, this table ronde is officially, I say officially because I think we're going to be digressing a bit, officially on Kathleen Raine's reception in Britain, whether it be as perhaps a misunderstood poetess or a misunderstood prophetess, or perhaps an artist who was welcomed. So that sort of area is what we're going to be looking at. And I think the best way to begin would be to ask our guests to say who they are, introduce themselves, and we'll see how the discussion moves on from there. As I said, we'll try to keep within the perimeters of what we've been given as a general subject, but I think we're going to be moving well out of that at a certain time. So, should we begin with you, Sonia? Is that
yeah, sure.
Is that okay?
I'm Kathleen's granddaughter. So she had two children. Anna was the oldest, and James was my father. He was a couple of years younger than her. Yes, so I'm her granddaughter.
Right, and Sam?
More removed.
I think you might put your mouth closer to the...
So I'm Sonia's son, and I was very lucky to have a kind of correspondence with Kathleen when I was in my sort of early teens. And she spent such a lot of energy writing me these beautiful letters, and I brought a few along to share a few.
Yes, I'm sure it'll be very interesting. And Vinod?
Yeah, Vinod Taylor. Basically came across Kathleen in 1993, and I'm also a trustee or in the council of Temenos Academy.
All right. The first question I think we could ask, which we discussed a little bit before, was your relationship to Kathleen Raine, how you got to know her. It's a bit obvious in your case, but the sort of relationship you maintained, if you like, with Kathleen Raine, and how the person came across, and how the poetess perhaps came across in your lives. So would you like to talk to us about that?
I was thinking it's actually quite hard to say where Kathleen ended and where I began, because from the very beginning I could say she taught me to love flowers, but I think probably I already loved them, but it was like it just came straight through, the love of flowers. And from the beginning, she took me into her garden. She showed me pansies, and she said, "Look, they've got faces." And that's probably my earliest memory of Kathleen, was her showing me pansies and saying, "Look at their faces. Each one has got a different face." She lived near us in London, so I would go round very often to her house. I'm just trying to think of it in a sort of chronological order. She had a cottage which she bought in Cumberland, and as a schoolgirl I used to go there very often, go walking, and I took Fiona, who's over there, my best friend from school, and she would make us a bowl of porridge, make us a packed lunch, and off we went for the whole day. And I had that thing that she had, that love of wild places. And again, it's like, where did one begin and one end, and how did it happen? But it just came straight through into me. And Fiona and I would just go for the whole day, and then it would be getting dark, and Kathleen would be starting to worry about us, and we would appear just as it got dark and tell her about our adventures. And the next thing I would say, she took me to the Isle of Canna in Scotland, where she had these friends called John and Margaret Campbell, and she took me there, and that was a wonderful visit. And as part of that visit, she took me to the place where it all happened with Gavin, and she told me a bit about that. After that, she took me, when I was 15, she took me to America, and we went to something in Colorado, and then we went to the Buddhists in California. And she just took me places and took me with her.
Sorry, excuse me. As the poetess, as the visiting poetess, was that the like,
what, the
professional?
American one?
Yes.
Yeah, there was a conference in Colorado, Green Gulch or something, and Keith Critchlow was there, and I thought he was wonderful. I really loved his stuff about geometry, and that's the main thing I remember from that trip. And then she took me to India when I was 21. She said, "Is it all right if I bring my granddaughter?" And we just had the most amazing time, which she's written about in her book.
Perhaps we'll come back to the Indian sequence at another time. Well, it's a question related to what you're saying. You said Sonia, that you associate your grandmother with the great outdoors and the flowers.
Yes, that was our sort of connection.
So were you aware from a young age of her being a poetess, or was that the fundamental thing? It wasn't. It was just your grandma. Well,
I was aware that she was. Yeah, I was aware that she was a poet. She didn't talk to me about poetry. She talked to me about flowers and birds and wild places. Yeah.
Sam?
Sort of thinking about this as we travel to Paris under the English Channel. It's so interesting. So I'm Sonia's son, and when I was in my early teens, Kathleen, as I say, had this lovely correspondence with me, which I brought some of these letters that she typed out, and she spent such energy nurturing my very childlike poems. And I still write poetry, and it's still childlike, unfortunately. I wish it were better, but it's just so different in a way to this whole conversation, my experience of Kathleen, in that, it's such a personal thing, and I know that in our conversations, such a lot of nurturing on a personal level, and such a lot of what Kathleen was for me was within the relationship, who she was to me personally. And also I remember her saying, because as an idealistic boy, I thought the world must change, and she said, change your street or change your neighbour or something like that. She don't go for global revolution, change the street you live on. And I used to run down the lane. My parents moved to very rural Ireland, seeking all this wilderness, and I used to run down the lane to see if I had a letter in the post box from Kathleen. One really interesting thing for me reflecting is that, particularly it's the poets I knew her, this idyll, this wild that she came from and that she looked back to, full of nature. To me, in my personal life, my own childhood idyll is 47 Poulton Square. From rural Ireland, coming across to London and getting the bus to Poulton Square and sitting at the top at the front of the double-decker buses and seeing the lines of traffic and hearing the traffic, that is now, in my mind, that childhood idyll, which is a funny little thing. And she created it, utterly created it. And I remember her, as some of you will, her mountains of books and her front room, which was just this sort of paradise of ideas, and such a feeling when she opened the door, such a feeling of this is the place in the world that one should be.
That's the same for me, that if you ask me for one thing about her, I would say that feeling when you knock on the door and you're waiting, that anticipation, waiting for her to open the door, and her arms would open to you. And that's just my sort of most heartfelt kind of memory of her.
Nice. Vinod?
And I think on this very point, Sonia, as I said, when I used to turn up at 47 Polton Square, it used to be always with the arm and that big shy, how lovely to see
that
you.
sign.
And
Yes.
it's amazing.
Sonia, yeah.
And then you have Daisy Bells behind her.
The cat.
The cat was very much part of her. But for me, Kathleen came into my life in 1993 while I was in Mumbai. And L.K. Sharma, the writer for Times of India, had written something about her and her love for Bhagavad Gita. And I was, by my guru, asked to do an international conference on Bhagavad Gita. And I thought, how wonderful it would be to have Kathleen Raine. But then how do I find her? I did write to her, but it went through the post office because 192 said she was ex-directory, so wouldn't give it. So I went to Farringdon Post sorting office, gave them the envelope with the stamp on it, and they addressed it, so I couldn't see it. And they sent the letter off. But I've met her at Nehru Center when Juan Mascaro's translation of Bhagavad Gita in Spanish and William Radici from SOAS was chairing it. And that's where I met with Gopal Gandhi, who actually then introduced me to Kathleen Raine at Nehru Center. And from there on, the journey just continued. She was also a member of the Oxford-Cambridge Club next door to South Audley Street, so where she would always take me for a cup of tea. So it was just an amazing role that she played in my life, and her love for India, plus as I got to know her, her love for Indian food. And we would bring her semolina and things like that with a lot of ghee in it, which would give her the strength. And she loved it enormously. So even my son, at the time, he was only a few months old. And I remember Kathleen in 1996 came when I got this freedom of the City of London. And she actually came to Guildhall because she said, I can't miss this for anything. I am going to be there. And she did come. So she was just a great spiritual mother.
Could you say a little bit more about that, what she actually represented and still represents for you then in that respect?
Yeah, because, okay, I have a biological mother, but with Kathleen, what I learned and what I found, and the thing was that she always used to call me Hanuman. Hanuman is from the epic of Ramayana. So when Ram had told him to bring a herb, so Hanuman didn't know what herb, so he would just bring the whole mountain and said, here, you take what you want. And that was the kind of situation of Temenos, if you remember, I think, when we had no money. And she said, well, what do we do? So I said, never mind, we will sort it out. So there was that personal relationship that grew with her. And at that time, I was in banking world as well, and working with Citibank, the American bank. And, I would pour my heart out, and she completely resonated because she did not like the materialism world. So those kind of things were very personal to remember about Kathleen Raine. And I think when we discussed, I showed you the Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, which was given to her by the Poetry Society of India on her birthday in 1998. And that she gave it to me in her will, which I cherish very much. And I think all the grandchildren keep asking about this, and hopefully they're learning about Kathleen. So yes, she had a profound effect on me. And even during her last stage of life, I used to read Bhagavad Gita to her at the Chelsea Westminster Hospital.
Yes, I remember you mentioning that. Perhaps we could, if that's all right, move into the area that I mentioned initially, which was, it's perhaps a little bit moving outside the immediately personal realm, but you can come back to it, of course. The realm of Kathleen Raine as someone that was an integral part of British cultural life, or not academia to a degree, I suppose, especially in the latter half of her life. I don't know. Do you feel that she was an integral part of that, or was she misunderstood, or that's the... Perhaps you, Vinod, you...
I think, again, if you go back to the poem that was on Shiva, now if you look at that, that's not kind of poem that a normal person would understand it, because you needed it. Kathleen poetry and everything, I think, was very deep. You really needed to understand. It was not your lyrics of something that was written in orderly fashion, or it was music or something, but it turned out to be music. And I remember discussing this with Dr. L.M. Singhvi, L.K. Sharma, Shima Sharma, sitting in Portland Square, there with daisy bells on one side, and as Sam talks about the books everywhere, and you're trying to find place to put something on. That time we used to discuss, and she was concerned that she is, but again, it didn't bother her. It did not bother her. She said, it is what it is. And for me, that poem of Shiva and other things that she wrote, I think were very profound. And again, her love for her own typewriter was again something that she did not want to go into New Age.
So did you feel a rejection of modernity, or this was a question which we were asking initially with Joseph's talk. Did you feel, is there a rejection of modernity, or?
Probably yes, but again, did it bother her? No. At least I believe it didn't bother her, but because she was much, much above, she was a realized soul, if I may say so. So, these were peripheries that didn't really bother her.
Yes.
I remember when she was recognized by the French government before the British did, right? And even there, it didn't worry her.
Sam, Sonia, would you, perhaps a more difficult area, I don't know, but...
I think that I was just quickly reading her autobiographies again before we came, because it's been a long time, and she said that when she went up to Cambridge, from that moment on, she was never remembered a time when she wasn't at odds with the world.
Yeah.
And I think she set herself, she was almost in exile from society. She was in exile from she left the land that she loved, and she went in this childhood country, went up to Cambridge, and as you all know, it was all very materialistic, and she just, I think that although she kept true in herself to this vision, very deep, but then on top of that she had this mask that she wore for a while. But I think basically she exiled herself almost from modern culture. She didn't like a lot of modern culture. She didn't like all the material attitude from the universities and things. So I think she just saw herself as a bit of a lone voice, really, for a long time. But then later in life, when she started studying Blake and when she gathered a group of people around her who saw things more the way she saw things, I think she took a lot of, I think she did take comfort, and I think it made her very happy that she, in the end, she was better received and that she did come into the fold, and I think her relationship with Prince Charles meant a lot to her. And she became progressively happier as her life went on, and she said to me in her 80s that each decade of her life was better than the previous decade, and she said that to me when she was 80, something, whatever. So for her, I think life just got better and better.
How nice.
Yeah. Because he used to say, my prince. It's always my prince, you see. And she was really affectionate. And she used to be very straight in her letters to the prince as well. She used to quote the Bhagavad Gita, the role of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, where she saw that the prince is the Arjuna on the battlefield, and he has to do what he has to do, you see. So yeah, those were very encouraging letters that she did exchange with the prince. And again, as I said, I remember the time when she was at the hospital, what it actually meant for the prince to visit her at the hospital while I sat there reciting the Bhagavad Gita, because, as she says, that was the only sanity left in her life, was the Bhagavad Gita.
Well, even Prince Charles used to go and have tea with Kathleen.
Yes, at Bolton
Tea
Square.
with Kathleen was
yes, that was
appreciated by all, including him. I think.
Did Kathleen ever talk to you about her relationship with Prince Charles, or?
Yeah, she was very. I think she was very heartwarmed. I think it meant a lot to her that he went and had tea with her, and that he saw her as this sort of spiritual guide or whatever. Yeah, I think that meant a lot to her.
Yeah, and I think.
Sorry, I mean, these letters are to a 12-year-old and 13-year-old and 14-year-old. She died when I was 14. And yet, I would say that while she was trying bravely to teach me poetry, ultimately she taught me a philosophy, and that philosophy is one that I carry with me, and I live my life by, actually. And a way of making decisions and making choices, and, you know, coming back to like golden thread. Yeah. And there's an acceptance, and if we have time,
Yes, well, you might want to pick something out.
I'll dig one out in a moment. There's an acceptance, so she talks quite a lot about the way things are, the order of things. I wrote a poem about our cat catching a mouse.
Yeah. And
I sort of made the cat the bad guy. And she gave me a very stern reply, kind of, you know, she was very fond of Daisy Bar, and saying, no, this is the order of things. And she, again and again, comes back in her letters to this, the order of things, the equilibrium out there in nature, but also within human experience. And I think probably, as Sonia says, kind of later on, feeling that she'd found a role in the world. She says to me in one letter, I'll just find it. It seems to me that we come to Earth always with some task to perform here, or some lesson to learn from life on Earth. Each life is a different task, a different lesson, and we know what it is for each of us. And I think she felt that. I don't know whether it came as a revelation to her and there was a point at which that became important to her, but she certainly passed it on to me, and that test of whether or not, you know, you are following that golden thread. I think it's very clear in the tradition. I also just reflect while I've got the microphone, that my experience of her writing as a teenager, as a young adult, as a student, and actually travelling in India and rereading, in my generation at my university, which was the University of Bath in England, you know, we're quite a materialist lot, really, and I don't say that in a kind of pejorative, negative way, but you know, an attitude to the world that it is a material world, and that you can investigate one thing at a time, and that you can take one thing at a time and understand it and sort it out. And the zooming out of the camera and seeing a wider world which can't be reduced into parts just was absent from my experience as a student, and consequently, reading her as a student, it was foreign to me, what she was writing. And I come back, I think after spending a little time living in Istanbul and living in Turkey and living with people who are quite religious, that actually forced me to kind of reappraise that and look again at her writing and see that if you have the attitude of certainly my generation of students, And a lot of my generation within the UK, and I can't say the state of play in France at the moment, I don't know, is there a lack of acceptance? Well, there's a culture of taking things in a very material way, one thing at a time, taking it apart, working out how it ticks, be it a social issue, be it an environmental issue, be it, to do with the soul, to do with the way we live our lives. That is just not on the same planet as the way that Kathleen taught me to think.
A holistic way, that's what you're saying.
Very holistic way, and a way that involves listening as well as just trying to problem solve. Whether things will change again, I'm not sure it's sustainable to think in a very piecemeal way about the world, because it's not satisfying. You only get so far. So I think, in a way, as I, recently become a father myself of a little creature, you start to reappraise and you start to see a wider picture and yourself in that picture. But in terms of the cultural debates at present in the UK on a lot of issues, they are still at a place that just is not listening, such that the kind of holistic way of seeing the world that Kathleen championed would register, would be understood, would be heard, I think.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
You were going to say something in the news? I don't know. Perhaps you want to add something to that? I don't know.
Yeah, again, as I said earlier, because the younger generation today, and I talk of my own children, and how they feel lost, even though we have tried to give the deep culture. And many a times, there are books of Kathleen Raine, the poetry of Kathleen Raine, and I see my grandchildren now taking interest in the poetry, and they feel that poetry, again, is something that is to write a poem and a poem to be written. I think they're two different things. And I think for I don't know so much now, but I think a lot of schools don't even do a lot of poetry stuff at the moment as well. And I think this, Kathleen, as I said, for me, it's been an immense influence in my life, particularly going forward with the grandchildren, and everybody has to her role, because I love her portrait that I have at home, and the grandchildren ask as to who this beautiful woman is. When you say she was a poet and they really want to go deep into her as to what kind of poet was she.
You're saying that's a generational thing? Do you think
Yes.
the young people growing up today, the age of your children,
Yes, so
grandchildren,
the grandchildren,
are looking more into this?
They are. And is it because of the kind of upbringing we're giving them, or because certainly it's not from the school?
I think the environmental issues now with climate change and the more understanding of the interconnectedness of things on an environmental level, ecosystems, I think that helps people to sort of see that it's all connected and it's a much bigger picture, and how fragile it is and how beautiful it is. And I think that view of the world is growing, and that she kind of feeds into that, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. Again, like what you're just saying, because in the London School of Economics, where Satish Kumar, the guy, the editor of Resurgence, when he went to give a talk, when he was shocked to know that there was no ecology department, yet it was a School of Economics. So if you don't have ecology, no earth, where is the economics? And these are the kind of very things that Kathleen used to talk about, the very basics. The law of nature, which Joseph is writing, and I think those kind of books and writings are so important in coming and bringing Kathleen back, maybe, and maybe the youngsters will resonate more with her now than people say who were in their 40s.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll just say another thing, actually, that there's a critique of Kathleen's of the kind of mechanical world and the industrial world and the scientific world in that form of progress. What she didn't quite live to really see in a critique is the digital world. I remember my first job, my CEO said to me that when writing you have to watch the balance between signal and noise. Is what you're writing signal or noise? And in the digital world and the social media world, there is an infinite and infinitely growing amount of noise. And if you read her poetry, but also if you look, as you said, look at the world the way she encourages you to look at the world, you know, the flowers have faces. That is a very slow and quiet way of looking at things that is the opposite to an endless amount of fairly meaningless data. And I think that either already or at some point in the future, people do get fatigued with an endless stream of meaningless information, which doesn't enrich particularly. It might enrage you, and it might distract you, but it doesn't change you.
So this connects with the subtitle of our coming together, which is Kathleen Raine a poetess of the past or the future? So you think that would be, that's the area, an area then? It's.
I don't see how far we can go without choosing more selectively what to engage with, and yeah, I do think.
Okay, Vinaj, I thought you were going to say.
Yeah, no, I think again, just changing a little bit as to Kathleen. Again, I sometimes used to sit with her and the kind of things she would say. So for me, I think she was a mystic in a way. She would say things sometimes and you wonder what she's trying to say. And yeah, even the poem on Shiva, when she talked about the destruction of the towers of power, right? For somebody to write that, such a powerful, and then suddenly you have the World Trade Center debacle in America. I think she was certainly gifted in many, many ways, and I think she had a little bag of the runes, they call it, right? And she used to take it out sometimes and tell me things from those. She used to love those runes, you know, and she had a little bag and she would take it out sometimes and say, right, let's look at it. And she would tell me things that mystified me as well. So that was another side of Kathleen, you know, that we didn't know, that as to her love for these kind of things. And she also had a picture of the founder of Radha-Swami. Yes, that was on her mantelpiece as well. So she had this love for the Eastern traditions as well, and she went deep into it. And you know, and when we did series of L.M. Singhvi lectures, and I think we were very fortunate to have His Holiness Dalai Lama speak at those lectures as well, right? And Bishop of London as well, right? Richard Chartis came to as well. So in those ways, you know, we kept her idea of keeping the Eastern traditions alive, which we still try and do, and make sure that that candle is always lit. You know.
But I think she uses a beautiful, or I like it, analogy of what's happening in the modern world, and she talks about seeing it as a tree, and one by one these leaves are falling off. The meanings of life are just dropping away, and you're sort of being left with a sort of like a skeleton. You know, there's no more religion. There's no, in our culture, a lot less, and all these things which have just sort of gradually just falling away, and then you think, well, okay, we're going to be left with this bare tree, but then I think that she would say, well, you know, going forward, you know, there's going to be seeds are going to drop to the ground, something new will come. I don't think she would only just say we have to go back to that tree how it was. You know, there's always, you know, in the organic world, it all regenerates and new things happen, and you know, the story is going to continue, isn't it?
I've got a good quote for you here. She impressed upon me again and again the idea of equilibrium, and she tells me the story in this letter and in a couple. She says, in India, some well-meaning English turned up at a village, and she says they were very keen on killing tigers for the benefit of the villagers. And in one village, an Englishman killed all the tigers, with the result that the vegetarian animals, like rabbits, ate all the villagers' vegetables. People went hungry. And she brought this equilibrium up again and again. And yes, it's about the equilibrium of nature, but it's also an early lesson for me in seeing things as a whole and coming back to our present culture. And by the way, I've worked in policy, in various aspects of policy in the kind of political world, of taking things piece by piece and trying, without understanding a lot of context, to fix things, like the Englishman in the village. I think it's a lesson that we just need to get to a point to be ready to learn it. There's no question that it's not relevant. It just may be a little bit down the road that we are ready to relearn it, I think. Speaking.
Yes, if I could just return to India then, because I rudely interrupted you when you were talking about your trip to India. Was it one trip or two trips?
I went with her on her very first trip. So she first went to India when she was 70, you know, when the rest of us are sort of feeling a bit tired. Off she goes to India, and then she had lots of other trips after that. And she took me with her, and they were so hospitable. And it was so warm. It's like going from a black and white television to a colour television. You know, for me, I was 21, and you go in the grey, you know, runway, and off you go, and then you land in India, and everything is colour and sound, and it was just fantastic. And they had laid on for us a 3-week trip around. We were so, you know, it was wonderful.
You mentioned at one point when she got off the plane, her first action. Didn't you mention that to me? Didn't she touch the ground, or? Perhaps.
Yeah, she touched the ground and then she said, "I'm home at last."
Yes.
Yeah.
She said that I'm home at last. And I think that time it was India International Centre, which she loved very much. And there's Ramchandra Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, used to be there. Kapila Vatsyayan used to have an office at the Indian International Centre. And there was a lady called Sushma Ghosh, who really used to take care of her immensely, of Kathleen, all the time. And of course you had Sheila Gujral, the wife of I.K. Gujral, who was caretaker prime minister. And again, Sheila was a great poet and a fantastic writer. So, and Keshav Malik, the brother of Kapila Vatsyayan, also, who had a profound relationships with Kathleen. And even today, whenever I speak to Dr. Karan Singh, he will always ask about Temenos, and even Mrs. Kamala Singhvi, who is not keeping well. But Temenos to India it is such a dear part of it, and particularly her book, India Seen Afar. It was so well received in India, so that, where she says, I think, if India is lost, all is lost.
I think she felt really embraced by India, and I think she responded to that. And I think, her life, in terms of relationships, had she had a lot of difficulties with a lot of her key relationships. Parents, children, husbands, Gavin, it was all a bit of a disaster. And then, so I think she did have a lot of love to give, but didn't quite manage to match all the love that she had to give with the right person to give it to. You know, there would seem to be problems wherever she went when it came to giving love. And I think she rectified that with us as grandchildren. You know, there was no problem there, that she was able to give us lots of love. But in India, she felt embraced. She felt, you know, a big family who loved her, and she could love them back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I mean, so the moment, even today, if I go to India International Center, because I still stay there, because it's just so nice to stay there, you still feel Kathleen Raine there, because she had this idea of walking at the lily pond. She would always go and visit that, and so many things. So still, when I talk about Temenos, immediately even the people that are working at Indian International Center would remember Kathleen and her visits, and what she loved about, about India. And I think that is something that was embedded, and maybe in her past reincarnation, she probably was in India.
Mm. Did you feel then at that latter part of her life, when she first went to India and she was reading more Indian texts and the Gita, did you feel she was turning away from the Western traditions, or was it something she incorporated into them?
Personally, I think she incorporated both of them, because what she found was that as she was having difficulty with Christianity in terms of trying to see where it was going, she felt that the message of Bhagavad Gita, which again I call it an encyclopedia of humanity, is probably a way of life. Bhagavad Gita it's not a book of religion, it's a way of life. And I think that kind of thing resonated with her. She also read the translation by N.S. Purohit through Kumaraswamy as well of Bhagavad Gita, and that also had a lot of impact on her. And then she met a lot of other people from that world when she traveled, and particularly Dr. L.M. Singhi, who was the High Commissioner. I mean, there was that relationship developed. And Dr. Karan Singh, again, himself a scholar of Shiva, and I think Karan Singh also came to Temenos to give some lectures. He's also, he's a fellow, right? He's a fellow of Temenos. So, with Kathleen, I think India was probably her home.
Sam, I don't know whether you have any other extracts or anything that you'd like to, on the same theme or something different. I don't know. You have a wonderfully appetizing pile of letters. I think we all want to perhaps hear from her.
We've not quite on the context of India. I mean,
well, it doesn't matter.
In the context of India,
or Britain, because that's meant to be our theme, isn't it? I don't know.
Yes, your story about when she visited the temple, I think, is relevant, and I will pick a.
Well, the story about when we visited the temple is a bit of an anomaly, really. When we went to India, we had a lot of the. I think she was asked to give them a list of where she'd like to go, and she put, she said Agra and all these things. So we went to Agra, and the Islamic architecture, absolutely wonderful. We loved it, of course. And then we went to Varanasi, and she describes that trip to Varanasi very well. I mean, very honest. She in her book, she is very honest about a lot of things. But she was very honest about that trip, because it was a bit of an anomaly that in her thinking and in her philosophy, she very much embraced Hinduism. But when we went to Varanasi that first time, we had a bit of an odd experience, which we were both quite unsettled by. So we sort of arrived late, and plans didn't seem to be going quite right, and we were sort of bustled through some streets, and we saw, I mean, I was very young, and it was her first time. We saw a lot of the dead and the dying in the streets, and which we'd never seen before. And then we went to a little temple, which was sort of the polar opposite to the Taj Mahal, which was, you know, white and pure and geometric and clean and beautiful. And we went into this little temple, and there was she describes it, I mean, far better than I can, but you'll remember the clip, Claire. And she talks about the priest lifting some sort of a curtain from a rock which was painted blood red. And it was just like a piece of rock painted blood red. And we were both, it was just outside our experience. We just didn't know what to make of it. You know, and it was some very, very holy rock that obviously just we weren't evolved enough spiritually to make anything of it whatsoever. And we were just rather disturbed by it. And we went back to our hotel, and neither of us could sleep. So we just spent the night awake talking about, you know, why has this disturbed us so much, you know? And I think she was upset with herself because she felt that she shouldn't have been disturbed by it, you know, that she should have understood it or better or something. So it's just a bit of an odd experience, but she writes about it very honestly in her book. Is that what you're...
Well, yes, very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Sam, you go.
Yeah, so sort of like following on from that, and again, kind of this, you know, bearing in mind that I'm writing to her from rural Ireland, and all of the different sort of nature, you know, the mice I'm trying to save from cats, and I think this kind of an acceptance is one of the great wisdoms that she's taught me, this acceptance of some of the way the world is. She says to me, I'll read you a few things that make a lot of sense to me. So it's Christmas, goodness knows, I was very young, and before opening presents I'd wanted to feed our pet rabbits, but unfortunately a pine marten had got there first and not only killed the rabbits but sort of painted the walls with them. And I sort of was quite disturbed by that. And she says it was dreadfully sad about the rabbits, and finding them must have been a dreadful shock on Christmas Eve. But it is all part of something greater than we are ourselves, the story of this world. And that's in one letter. And she kind of follows on, because a lot of these are sort of versions of the same letter in a funny way. She said, cats know what their task is and carry it out very faithfully. Blake wrote, the fox looks after himself, but God looks after the lion. And she says, one portion of being is the prolific, the other the devouring. But the prolific would cease to be prolific unless the devourer, as the sea received the excess of his delights. This is quoted from Blake. And then she retells me the story of the well-meaning Englishman. And she says, you should never take sides in nature. And that message, that kind of acceptance, I think, has meant a lot to me. A kind of I don't know whether it's a later version of herself to the version in India, but the acceptance, is it a kind of a faith? It's certainly a kind of a knowledge. And again, coming back to the present experience in the UK in kind of mainstream culture and policy and things like that, is a world away from the sort of peace that she's able to. I think that's the biggest thing she tried to get across to me again and again and again, is a kind of a peace, and a peace with the way the world is.
And yet she was quite a fighter. She wouldn't accept things as they were, in a sense.
She absolutely accepted the role of, as she said, God looks after the lion. There is a fight out there, you know, the fighting is, that's fine. But there's a trust that the fighting that she's doing and that the struggles we have are our role. There's one more, actually, that I'd meant to read for you. She's talking to William Butler Yeats' wife, and I've lost it. Where's it gone? Forgive me, you might have to come back to me.
Okay, no, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Vinod, I think did you want to say anything? Or?
No, but again, I know her love for India was there and all of that, but at the hospital when we thought that she was not going to be anymore, and I remember flying in Jock Dalrymple from Glasgow to do the last rites for her at the hospital. And of course she survived after that, a good few years after that. But so I think there are certain things that she still wanted to do within the framework, and I think, was it just to keep the family happy or what? It's just one of those things. But again, she was a very deep person. To me, I think sometimes it's very difficult to describe her. As I said, she can I sometimes think that she manifests things, because Temenos was always hand to mouth. And she would say, right, we're going to do this. And suddenly you wonder, well, how are we going to do it? And yeah, God will take care. And he did. And then it was really amazing to see what she could do. And her willpower was really, really, really great. The only thing, as I said to you, if Daisy Bells went missing, then it was like the world is ending for her. And I remember she would ask me to call astrologers in India to find out when the cats will be found. Is she going to come back? And it was really nightmare for her, Daisy Bell going away or missing for even a few hours. And
She had all that love to give, didn't she?
Oh,
yeah.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
Yes, I found the quote. Forgive me, I didn't want to mark these. She says, "It seems to me that we come to Earth always with some task to perform here, or some lesson to learn from life on Earth. Each life is a different task, a different lesson, and we know what it is for each of us." And I think probably for me, reading from what conversations we've had as a family, she did feel that she understood for herself what that was, and I think there was a piece in that, as you say, the later in her life, the more I think that piece was evident.
Well, thank you. Claire, do we stop around now, or do we have questions? I can't quite...
It's 5:30, isn't it?
Yes. If we could thank our guests.
Thank you.
Yes, I think so. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank
you.
Thank you.